Ken Swartz, welcome back to the show. How's it going, my friend? What's new?
Oh, glad to be on. Well, a whole lot of things are new, and yeah, it's changing every day.
Yeah, things are getting wild out there. I think we're getting ready to hit some kind of what does Jay call it? The fourth turning.
Yes.
So, talk to us about this Genie missile launch that happened on July 19th of 1957 in Nevada.
Well, that was the end result of a program, and it was the Genie missile program. And for those of you who don't know about it, happened. I think the test was in July 19th, 1957, and it was a air-to-air missile with a nuclear warhead. About 3 kilotons was its design. And so that was the test, but it was the getting there was the is the story.
Yeah, so how did that happen? I had done a little bit of research and it ties back to Eisenhower.
Yeah, it comes well since the end of the Korean War was pretty much coming to an end, and my dad had been there as he flew B-26s in the Korean War. He flew with the ROK Royal Republic of Korea Air Force, and trainees and stuff for them, and so this I think it happened in to be 1956, which was a whole long time ago. And he was sort of an expert on some of the Air Force's missiles, or what early parts were. And so they've been having a real problem with this program. It kept getting sabotaged again and again. And of course, they just figured it was the commies, right? It's 1956. The Cold War is just at its peak, and so he was assigned to basically to successfully complete the Genie missile project because the other had been sabotaged. So, well, he was figured it was the commies. So what he did is he said he had a plan. He had a show missile, and then he had a secret missile. And the first one, because it had been sabotaged so much, so he got a big open room, like in the facility, where on the walkways you could look into the bigger room, and you could see them working on the missiles. So everybody walking down the hallways would see the missile there, and it was that kind of kept it. But there was another missile being built, the second one, and that was in a back room that my dad only had the keys on. Nobody knew about it except, of course, him and the engineers. And so whenever they fixed the stuff on the first missile in the kind of the viewing bay, they would later sneak back to the other room and do the same thing, because he'd know it had been sabotaged right before they were going to do testing and stuff. So anyway, so it took a while. It took several months to build the missile, get it up there. So they were ready to go for test firing the next day. And my dad, of course, knew that would be the time that the saboteurs would hit. So and of course the public missile was the bait, right? Because it's not just to get the missile completed. It's also to catch the saboteurs. And so they put it in a big open space where it's going to be moved out tomorrow, and they started wrapping it in tape and barrier signs and everything. So they made it physically impossible for someone to get from those barrier signs and tape to the actual missile itself. And it was up on a few pallets of wood right in the kind of the center of this big room with the tape around it. And then of course they kind of got the guards backed off, and they weren't there. And of course they had those on the second door where nobody could get in to get to the other missile. And yeah, and so what happened, I'll tell the story how it got sabotaged. In the middle of the night, some guy in warehouse, we'll get to more of that, decided he needed to get the pallets underneath the missile. At least this is what the story was. And so he went up from when there was other pallets in the warehouse down below, right? He didn't need to get them. So he went up to there where it was in the open, and he tore down all the tape and removed the barrier signs and all the barriers. There's a lot of them, right? They made it real difficult to get there. And then, of course, he went in to get the pallets, and lifting the missile off, it fell over on its side and broke itself, right? And of course, the morning it come in, the missile's been damaged. The general runs in, oh my God, my career's over. This is over. And my dad said, no, that was just a demo display missile. This is the actual missile. So he took him back to the back room, opened it up, and there's where the missile was hiding. And of course, all safe and sound. The guy said, oh, my career's saved, all that. But of course, they took the warehouse guy and away because my dad's just at a certain rank, and he was, let's say, taken away to enhanced interrogation. And that was, it didn't have the nuclear warhead on it. That came later, right before putting it under the plane. And so he went away, and they did lots of enhanced interrogations on him, right? Just you can imagine, right? And but the thing was, no matter what they researched, they couldn't find any reason. They couldn't make a connection with the commies. They researched the background. They just couldn't make any connection. It was like somebody took over his brain and made him go do this insane thing. Of course, he was, probably spent some time behind bars and everything. But that was the weirdest thing. After they briefed my dad, a month or so afterwards on what went down, because it was successful. And I think in the show notes, you probably have a link where they can actually do that. Yeah, because what they had to do, it's an air-to-air missile. It's you fire it and it go about 6 miles or something, and it set off like a 3 kiloton nuke to a 1 kiloton nuke, depending on what they wanted it. And originally they said the whole thing was they're going to make the Genie to shoot down Russian bomber fleets, right, that are coming to attack America. But they ended up making 3,000 of them, and the Russians didn't even have 100 bombers, right? So that's what the excuse. And also, the Soviets aren't stupid, right? They're not going to be flying their bombers, in a formation, obviously, because they'll know about the Genie missile. Of course they did, and so that whole explanation is basically just BS. What they were really built for to shoot down flying saucers. Because if you fire this thing off, it's got like 1,000-foot kill radius. I mean, just the radiation will kill you, let alone the blast of a 3 kiloton nuke, right? It's kind of like with hand grenades and horseshoes and nuclear bombs. You just kind of get close to do the thing. So it was actually designed for to shoot down flying saucers, is what the actual purpose of that thing was. And that was and they successfully defeated the sabotage attempts. And so the missile was launched, and of course they made it. It became a success. And but that was a mystery. And it was years later. My dad had told me the story, and there's a lot of things that people don't talk about, or it's kind of out there in a mystery. And the various, let's say, extraterrestrial forces on our planet. And I don't know if your listeners have ever heard about it. Amicizia. I'm butchering Italian. Sorry about that. Italian speakers out that. It's friendship in Italian. It says 50 years of amicizia, and it was one of the classic. Are you familiar with this kind of sighting that happened in the 50s in Italy?
No, I am not. But that was getting ready to be my question. Did your dad tell you about this whenever you were young?
Oh no. This was figured out later, because this is years later when I was doing research. The modus operandi of the people that sabotaged the Genie missile. It was their kind of what these guys did. So it's probably these guys, and of course they do have flying saucers, and having a missile that can take out a flying saucer is not a good idea. And I'll kind of give you a little breakdown of the case. Probably, maybe if you haven't heard it, maybe some of your listeners. Well, it happened in like the mid 1956, about the same time my dad was doing his thing, having that whole Genie missile project go there. And there's 2 books. This is the one you probably want to read first: 50 Years of Friendship, or Amicizia. Sorry about the butchery there. And looking back 50 years, they realized that they were being, manipulated and kind of used. And this was a serious operation. People talk about, they touchy-feely. They actually spent over the extraterrestrials provided, basically it was this, the book's written by Stefano Breccia, and he's the author of the book. And he was in contact, the main protagonist or contact guy is a Bruno C60. And he was the main contact. Those are probably butchered Italian names. And so this guy, Stefano, he just basically wrote like a book of what really went down. He was sort of like the recorder of it all. And so the first book he made was Mass Contacts. That was written right after the events. And it's sort of like just a countdown of what went down. And the 50 years is afterwards. They kind of realized, they were having them do lots of different weird things, and some of them, like the world depends on you doing this and so there was like dozens of people involved, right? This is not just a small contact. and they had these human-looking aliens. They looked like humans, except they were extremely tall. I call them, and maybe Jay calls them, the little heads. And what it is they are humans in a sense, but there's a technology, a life extension technology. A lot of the alien species use it, and it basically, when it's applied to humans, it stops your aging, actually reverses it, but it takes you back to a time when a side effect is it makes the bone plates on your bones become young again, so they start growing. So every year you're alive, you get a little. You've heard like guys like Saint Germain, right? He's living for centuries, and every time people see him, he's a little bit taller. So I'm not saying Saint Germain worked for they called him the W56 or Victory 56 because they met him in 56. That's the group. And there was another, Contras, that CRTs they call them, that were like their competitors. And then there's a few other groups that kind of mixed together, and these different alien groups were like mafias battling for control on different spaces in the planet Earth. And you really have to read the book to do it. But they had people in Italian, English, German, Russian people. They had all these people just involved in this big contact case. It was mostly in Italy. And for instance, the boss, they gave themselves names. It's Dim Petito, and the top dude was like 12 feet tall, right? He was like the main boss. And then there's a couple of 10.5 footers. There's a Kinyo, and he was 8.5 footers tall. And he was kind of like their direct boss. Like, this doesn't come out of things. I don't know, probably many of your listeners have heard of Catherine Austin Fitz.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, and she recounts a story, and some of your listeners listen to it. She had I guess it's a story from a staff member of the IMF. They had one of the IMF meetings in Europe, and this staff member, there was a problem somewhere, and this staff member had to go take care, because they're a member of the IMF, right? They got their staff, and so they accidentally let her into the wrong room. And in the very front of the room, this big auditorium, at the front of the room, there's just like the very top guy, the heads of the countries, their main rep. And on the stage in front of them, the dais in front of them, there was this 8.5 foot tall person. And these guys, and what it is, if you look at like the time that they grow, so the 8.5 footer might be 4 centuries old. The 12 footer might be 1,000 years old. Well, and they have pictures of these people. They built them a villa with 11-foot doors in it, right? So this, with that 450 pounds of platinum, and like here they actually have a picture of one of the guys, one of the giants, and they back engineered his size. That's the Kenyo guy, and he was 8.5 feet tall. So this is some serious stuff. And then what happens is, basically in the first book really, if you should read the 50 years retrospective, and they realized they were used and kind of being used to training themselves to manipulate humans to get them to do what they want, and a lot of other stuff. So that's, you read in the second one, you should get Mass Contacts, because the first third of it is about these Umites, and it's really a disinformation campaign by this group of extraterrestrials. Well, they're humans, but they work for somebody else, right? They say that they have off-world community of like 600 kind of like off-world human type people. But the toolkit, like we have jets, right? Fighter jets and aircraft carriers and all that kind of stuff. And we have that because we have hundreds of millions of people, right? You need hundreds of millions of people to really support a technology. And so the toolkit that these guys were using is a toolkit that would have to have, billions of people behind it to support it, because it's so sophisticated. A few 100,000 humans could not support, no matter how old they were, could support this level of technology that they have. So they were obviously using somebody else's technology. And if you have people, if you're doing operations on Earth, what would be, and then the second half is basically the 2/3 of the second half is basically their stories, kind of the beginning and toward what happened toward the end afterwards, right afterwards. And I would really recommend people to do it, because these are the guys. These are the guys that are running the IMF. That means these are the guys behind the Great Replacement. And one of the things Bruno was kind of surprised at, because they were given all of these 1 ounce platinum blanks, right? Just 1 ounce, and he thought, where am I going to spend these, right? And he went to just like a local a coin dealer. When the guy saw it, he immediately bought him up and gave him his money. And if you trace it back, it's the whole platinum market is read by the British Crown. So, and then the House of Rothschild. But the thing is, and there's some other reports that people are out there. For instance, there's a guy in Harvard. This is just a secondhand story, and probably some people can find this report. That's buried away in my computer, but I remember reading it years ago. Okay, he's at Harvard. You know, he doesn't have as much money, so he's running like scams on the side to make him a little bit extra bucks. And eventually, these two guys in suits, black suits and stuff, hats, come to him, and he thinks he's being busted by the FBI. This is like 40 years ago. So, and he says, no, the guys, it wasn't the FBI. In fact, the guys were kind of impressed with his skills at running these scams, and they wanted him to like join their organization. And so there was a bit of negotiating back and forth, and eventually he said yes, he'll join. And they brought him in, and they had a meeting, and he signed papers or whatever. And then out of the closet walks this 8.5 foot tall human. Said the largest human he'd ever seen. And so these group of humans are running it. So like if I came to you and like they came to this guy, but he was a little too sociopathic, and I guess he screwed him a little bit, kept too much money on one of the deals, and so they kind of kicked him out of the organization. He never got up to the level where I guess they offered him. But that's if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I have this technology. You're gonna live, for centuries, right? And there's side effects." And in the Mass Contact book, they talk about there's one guy that one of their guys had been working there for 12 years, right? He doesn't age at all. He gets a little bit taller, and he's actually got a wife and some kids. And I guess it's time for him to move on. They have a thing. This is what happened. And it's not quite sure whether the aliens claim that they could see into the future, like remote viewing, even though this book was written centuries, and they knew there was going to be an airplane crash. So they just arranged to have somebody look just like him on that airplane. And one of the things that Bruno and Stefano, whenever they needed something, these taxi drivers would drive up, real Italian taxi drivers, but they were like zombies. They just followed orders and did whatever they were. And sometimes they'd see these taxi drivers later, and they'd be like normal people. But they asked these extraterrestrials what they did, and they said that they put stuff in their brains, and like it allowed them to make them into sort of like zombie-like servants. Well, they'll just tell them, with the voice, go here and pick this person up, then they take them somewhere and drop them off, and then they forget what they did. It's like, and it's kind of the same way when they had that, they butted that warehouse worker, right? They could probably see through his eyes and do others, and they just took him over and used him for what it is. But that was like in the 50s, right? We didn't know anything about, nanobots in the brain for controlling, and various types of psychological hypnosis. I mean, there was what's that stuff? Operation Paperclip brought up a bunch of those. What was that CIA program? Monarch program. I mean, that was just the beginning. So this is super advanced stuff. And so it's just their operandi. And so that was a case of these guys doing it. And they had different groups of it. It was kind of like the closest you could describe it if you read the books. There's different groups. It's kind of like what it was imagine an interstellar Cold War, right? And like the W-56 group would be like, let's say we could call them the Americans, the Soviets, right? And then the Contras on the other side were like the Soviets. One was the Americans, one was the Soviets. But there was also a few groups, but like the British are there too, right? So there's a few other extraterrestrial groups in this level of conflict. And the Greys and the aliens. Remember, I don't know if the 1550s, they had that big battle over Nuremberg in the sky. And then the future forecasting group remote viewed it. And they had like on one side, they had the mantoid Greys, and they were battling these humans who had like reptoid overlords. And so they were like battling it out. And so these humans are basically working for what the people call the reptoids, or the scaly ones. And obviously they can't walk around on the streets. But and I've noticed there's been reports of like 20-foot tall, reptoid type beings. And if any of your people are familiar with the Soviet Union, there is a plethora of meetings of humanoid-like people in the Soviet Union. They're 10 feet tall, but they have unusually small heads for their body, because that's the other side effect. And we have actually a picture of Kenyon in the book, is that as you grow, right, your body grows, but your head doesn't grow nearly as fast as your body. So by the time you're 8.5 feet tall, you have like an unusually small head for your body. But by the time you get 10 feet tall, it's almost ridiculous. smaller in size than the rest of your body. It's just one of those side effects that you get from this technology that extends the human lifespan.
Man, I would hate. I mean, I'm already tall, Ken. What if I got that technology? I would be like 20. I would get to be like 20 foot
Oh
tall.
yeah, eventually, I guess DiPietro, he was 12. At some point, they actually go to the moon or they go somewhere else where gravity is lower. Because if you're 12 feet tall, you have extreme chance of breaking your bones, just because as you double in size, you actually quadruple in your mass or your weight. So the pressure on your bones. I mean, that's why elephants have gigantic bones, right? Because there's that mass volume ratio thing going on, an exponential. And so supposedly at some point when they get too tall, they go to the moon. But they're recruited. And so this gets one Italian guy, right? He doesn't show up. They get an Italian guy that looks almost like him. The plane flies and crashes in the mountains. And of course, the body's identified as his, even though he's got a wife and kid. And then allegedly he was moved off to South America because there's a lot of Italians in South America, right? And what these people are, they'd be like the assistant to the assistant vice president, right? They'd never be in positions of power, but they'd be assistant to, a secondary public figure. And like this Stefano, he by just chance, he walked into this place. It was in southern Italy. And there is one of the guys that he knows, one of these W-56ers, the guys that are maybe 6.5 foot tall. And he's talking to a prominent Italian politician. And that guy didn't know that Stefano knew that Italian politician, because if you read their bullshit story, they're like if the Umites won, we're supposed to be space brothers helping humanity develop, and we can't interfere with you because the prime directive, right? All this bullshit. And then he finds one of the dudes talking to a top Italian politician. And how much of that's platinum? Now it's rumored, I can't document this, but Moxie fusion, I think we talked about it before.
Yes.
One of the easiest Moxie fusion runs is you get zirconium hafnium oxide. It's about 4% hafnium and zirconium, and they're in the same family. They're in the titanium family for those. And metal oxygen fusion, you fuse a metal with an oxygen in a pressurized argon atmosphere. And we've had a show on that. I've done a dozen shows. You can go out and learn about it. But the yields are, you get, when you take the hafnium, even though it's 4%, it's got a 50% of the yield on the zirconium, the rhenium. Zirconium turns into platinum, to palladium, and then the hafnium turns into platinum. It actually gets rhodium and a little bit of silver, and you get a little bit of gold and rhenium and osmium. It's a whole. If you look up MOXY, Moxie fusion, or metal oxygen fusion ResearchGate, you can read the paper. It was done by Giorgio and Crilio in 2004. Right? I didn't do it. It's a science paper. You can read my description of it and then take the link. It's MOXY or metal oxygen fusion ResearchGate. Just read the paper. It's not, but it's rumored that some of the platinum, because when you synthesize platinum through the Moxie process, it puts out different isotope ratio than, let's say, platinum you dug out of planet Earth. And by the way, just for people, if you dug platinum out of Mars, it would have a unique ratio of isotopes. Isotopes are when you have a certain amount of protons, different sets of neutrons, and then they have a distinct ratio. So the platinum from the moon would be unique from the platinum, let's say, from Mars, or we took platinum from Mercury. Everyone, or wherever, it would have a different group. And it's rumored that some of the platinum that you buy off the London platinum market doesn't have the same isotope as planet Earth.
Do you think that this had more to do with platinum than it had to do with copper or gold?
No, because platinum is an easy burn, right? Zirconium hafnium. You can get zirconium oxide, zirconium hafnium oxide. They're zircons. Zircons are little tiny crystals. They're the second hardest thing from diamonds, and they wash out of granite mountains, and they're way more durable than even silica, right? So there's beaches that are like 40% zircons in various parts of the world, and you can buy zirconium for like from China, zirconium hafnium oxide powder for like 50 cents a kilogram, and it's a really easy burn. The one that the guys were doing with tungsten, they're burning tungsten and oxygen to make gold, but the problem was it made like a lot of osmium. And osmium tetroxide is one of the most toxic things you don't want in your body. So you have to be careful which burn you do, and that you don't make some nasty metals that are kind of toxic to you. So, but anyway, I'm just saying that's interesting. I really, these are the guys. These are the guys that are running the Great Replacement. These are the guys running the IMF. These are the guys behind globalization. These are the guys that are trying to wipe us out and exterminate us. These are your enemies, you know. And the thing was, it looked like they were all hooked into like the royal families of Europe. But the thing was, right, the queen ran the platinum market, or the crown ran the platinum market, but the queen died of old age, didn't she? And Lord Rothschild, he died of old age too, didn't he? But the human operatives that joined this organization, they don't die of old age. Now, sometimes they get killed because these different groups battle each other for turf. But you know, it's kind of like a mafia almost thing. But you know, it's like you know, you got the Russians, you got the Chinese, you got the French, you got the British, you got the Americans, right? They're all trying their own little deal. So it's something like that, right? But they have the similar technology, and they hire different people to work for them, because the Contras, they're like a group of extraterrestrials. They're kind of tall and they're kind of blondish looking, but I don't think they're like the classic ones. They have weird looking eyes that are kind of like, their eyes are really big, so it makes them look like a little cross-eyed or close together. And they have human operatives that work for them, right? So it's this whole like interstellar Cold War thing. It's a quite the good read. But just when you're reading Mass Contacts, remember the first part of it is their disinformation campaign, which you can learn about how their intelligence operations operate. Because if you look at the basic run, if you look at it, you think, oh, these are our space brothers here to help us develop to higher levels. But if you look a little deeper, it looks like it's a total scam. And you go right into like scammers. And then you just dismiss this as like a bullshit scam. So, but that's an intelligence operation, right? The shallow thinkers, oh, it's our space brothers. The deeper thinkers, oh, this is just a scam. But in reality, behind it all, it's an intelligence operation, which basically discounts their operations on Earth. You got to cover your tracks, right? So you got to have a disinformation campaign. That's standard practice. So it's just one of those interesting things, and we'd probably talk more about that. So, but people would have to really study it. So 50 years of anesthesia and Italian, 50 years of Italian, it's an Italian case. And then the other one that Stefano Breccia wrote was Mass Contacts. So, you know, it's got a little weight to it. So yeah, and these are the guys, man. They got pictures, they've got artifacts, they've got everything, right? And I think there's a couple of films on YouTube. You just go to YouTube, type it in, and there's a whole movie that they made, like an hour-and-a-half movie or more, on this whole contact. And a lot of it's Italian, but they do have an English translation.
Did your dad tell you that this is really for to take down UFOs?
Yeah. Oh no. He had questions on what it was being used for, and it was obviously it wasn't used for Russian bombers. They made 3,000 of them, right? The Russians didn't have 100 bombers, and they're certainly not going to fly them in packs. It was like there's no the whole cover story would just stink, and they made 3,000 of them. They were operational up to 1985. From 1956, right? 57 when they started, production. So they kept them around. They said they had a 3 kiloton warhead on them, and they came up with later surface air-to-air missiles, and a lot of those also had nuclear weapons on them, but they were for air blasts, and they weren't like a tactical for attacking stuff on the ground. These were, you had a 6-minute burn, so you had to really turn your plane fast, not to get your ass blown up. And they have the film's pretty amusing because they had to. I think they blew it up at like, I don't know, a couple miles high, 20,000 feet or something. And then they had these idiots. They got 5 people to go stand on ground zero below in the blast wave and showing that it's all safe and effective. My dad figured he didn't want to do that. It wouldn't be as safe. So he flew wingman on Captain Williams. I think Captain Air Williams actually launched the missile over Yucca Flats, and my dad flew wingman. You could see his plane on the side. He figured it'd be safer there than on the ground with those idiots. So, but that's the thing. And so then he was done. The project was proven, and then they took it to mass production and started. He was at that point. He was no longer. They just take the project. It kept getting sabotaged, and they couldn't figure out how. Right, every way they did, they were always being thwarted. Well, my dad fooled those aliens or those extraterrestrials that work for aliens. So if my dad pulled it off, humans 1, aliens 0. That means we can pull it off. But these guys aren't the brightest and smartest people, and they can be defeated and they can be discovered and exposed. And these, these are the guys. These little heads, they're the guys that run the little hats. They're the guys that run the Rothschilds. They're the guys that run those old families. They're the guys that run the aristocrats. And it's as Sun Tzu said, know your enemy. If you know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you will lose half your battles. So know yourself, know your enemy. It's these guys, and then you can have success. Because really, the basic thing is we're under alien occupation. That's it. We're under alien occupation through the IMF, through the globalism, through the banking cartels. That's when you put it all together, right? There was always like a missing puzzle on how the things came to be the way they came to be. Well, it's the extraterrestrial connection. That's the one they aren't getting. And if it was just these guys, we'd be screwed. But there's other people. There's like the Contras. So there's other groups fighting these guys for control of Earth. You've got the Contras, you got the Greys and the Mantoid symbiosis. You've got these guys and their little scaly masters, and there's a few others, right? So it's sort of like an off-world Cold War, and different parts hold different parts of the planet, and they're always like kind of, messing with each other, having their human agents mess with other people's human agents, right? Or other groups' human agents. So it's like this underground. Like one of the there's a woman that Stefano talks about. She's very beautiful. That she that happened back in 1956, right? And in his in the 20 years, he recalls that it's like 50 years later, and he's in Heathrow, right? And there is that woman, that very same woman that he saw 50 years ago, and she hadn't aged a year, just perfect skin, just perfect beauty. And there she was, supposedly going to get on the same flight. But when the flight got off, he looked for her, and she wasn't on the flight anymore or something. So it was kind of just messing with his mind. So these people are out there, and you can't really detect them from a normal person, right? Because they are normal people. They're people that have been recruited, and they get this technology. So they're always going to look like in their 30s, and they don't seem to age, and they get a little bit taller. So you see some dude that's like 6.5 feet, 7 feet tall, and he looks like he's in his 30s, but he's got an old look about him. He's probably one of those guys. They're walking our streets. These people, they have layers of contact. When you get 7 feet high and you're not aging, it's kind of hard. So you go underground and you work in one of the underground bases until because what's interesting, the hierarchy of control of this organization is entirely by height. And we don't do that on Earth, do we? You go to any organization, people aren't organized by height, but if height is directly associated with age, we have plenty of organizations on planet Earth which are organized by age. And so that height and age correspond is, that 12.5 foot guy, he's, how old is he? 1,000 years? We don't know. There's the 8.5 footer. How old is he? 400, 500 years? We don't know. And then there's 7 footers and 6.5 footers. And I think you grow like a quarter inch, maybe a quarter inch every year, maybe to a quarter to a half an inch, depending how tall you are. And so you have to kind of figure, it's like Saint Germain, right? He was always showing up. He never seemed to age. He always get a little bit taller every time they saw him. So, and was he working for these guys or the other organization because they all use the same tech? I don't know. But they don't give that tech to the Rothschilds, do they? No. Sorry, Rothschilds, you don't get that life extending tech. No. Queen of England, King of England. No. Charles, you're dying of cancer. No, you're not going to get that life extending tech. If you had that life extending tech, you wouldn't be dying of cancer, would you? You'd be looking 30 years old and looking forward to several hundred more years of life. So it's a powerful buy, right? If somebody came and give you that offer, you're going to live for all this time. You're going to have all the money you need. You're just going to be the assistant to the assistant secretary of something, right? And you're going to report back to us and plant, listening devices, or maybe bought a few people to make them, useful operatives, mind controlled operatives. You'll probably do it. I don't know. Some people would, I think. And they all seem to go after like sociopathic, kind of psychopathic people that are already a little bit,
It almost sounds like the classic vampire story, do our bidding and we'll turn you into a vampire so you can live forever. And then they never really get turned into a vampire.
No, but they do live for a long time. They get this. We're not quite sure what the treatment is that allows them to do it. But a lot of like the tall whites, they have the same thing. They just get taller and taller and taller until they die. So I think it's a very common technology that aliens develop, not just anyone. It's like, ABC technology. It's probably a torsion technology because these W56ers, they have the capacity to change time. It's called torsion. Professor Kozyrev, if people haven't heard of torsion technology, it's about the level of where electricity is now, but it's time tech. And one of the things like Stefano or Bruno would go down in their underground bases, They would be down there, they think, for like 5 or 6 hours, and they'd come back up and only be a couple hours. So part of the reason that they can create these bases, they make time go faster. And so smaller areas look bigger on the inside. So they can basically just open voids, time voids in the earth, and then they stabilize them, then they drop their spacecraft in. Now it's in a vacuum, and then they just, with the manipulation, you can put a tube up to the surface and then fill it full of air. They've had a couple times where they have to close these things down, and the air vented through the Adriatic Sea. And when you have a bunch of bubbles, boats no longer can be buoyant. And so they found like fishermen's boats on the bottom of the Adriatic. The guy still holding the wheel, right? The boat undamaged, sitting at the bottom of the ocean. And that's when and then there was a bunch of venting of bubbles. There was, there's the Adriatic Sea. They basically hang out at the Adriatic Sea. That's where this group's main base is, in Europe at least. And so, you read the books. I mean, they're the people who run the IMF. They're the people that run the little heads. They're the people that are, doing the great replacement on us. So if you want to stay alive, I would recommend reading those 2 books.
So you believe that this is connected to, like, this is the real control center for everything? I mean,
oh yeah. They were around. They used to run everything. The Mantoid Greys seem to have pushed into their racket, but they're still here, and their humans are still running their operations. So yeah, they've been around for. You look back in Mesopotamia times, right? You see on the cylinders, you see like the kings of old that ruled for like hundreds of years. And they're always depicted as really, really large beings. And of course, the scholarly explanation for that is, no, they just make in those artwork, they make the more important you are, the bigger you are, right? That's usually the excuse on why the kings tended to be really big and the gods tended to be really big and the regular humans were really small, is just because the matter is size and importance. But what happens if that isn't? What happens if those ancient kings of Sumeria are these people, humans, that have been brought into the organization? And they were literally the kings of ancient Sumeria. And that's why they were 8 feet tall and 10 feet tall, because that's what they were. And so at maybe back points of history, our society was run a little bit more straightforward by this manipulation. And there's just dozens and dozens of reports, especially in the Soviet Union, of these human aliens with unusually small heads. And I'm sure your researchers can go out there, look it up on Google, have the AI help you, and you'll just find lots of reports in the Soviet Union about these type of human aliens. There's one where they landed in a schoolyard, and these guys got out and they're like 10 feet tall. They're humans, but they have like really tiny heads, in proportion to their body. It's like a classic UFO case from the Soviet Union. So these guys have been seen, and like they had the case where these large humans are walking under one of the lakes, Lake Baikal. And Soviets send divers to get them, and they blast them out of the water. Unfortunately, one of the decompression chambers wasn't working, so they threw the ones that they could in one, and the rest of them all died. Wiped out a bunch of Russian special forces guys when they tried to get down to the floor to see these really tall humanoid type beings walking on the bottom of Lake Baikal, I think it was. So yeah, there are just lots of reports of these people. And it's just an ugly. It's just what it is. And people should read the literature and know who runs the globalist, who's behind it all. It's these guys, and there's other groups, right? But pretty much for Europe and the Middle East, these guys were there first, and their operations are the ones that predominate now, and still predominate.
I really don't know how I feel about it, Ken, because with all the manipulation going on, the government involvement, the military faking alien abduction stories, having kids dress up as gray aliens and abducting people, hitting them with a gun that's called a stun gun, which is basically a memory suppressor. The waters just get heavily muddied. And I think that it's pretty convenient that we can just place this on some extraterrestrial force. That way that humans just keep getting away with what they've been doing for decades.
Oh, well, I just read the mass contact books. The first third of it's their disinformation. I think that's what it is, man. There's just these different groups, and they're battling for power, and the planet is the prize. And we're in the way. They put the Florida, the Georgia Guidestones and all the goals of the globalist. It's like population, centralize everything into one locus and wipe out the population to a manageable level. that balances with Earth's resources, right? Which they say is like 500 million people. And well, there's more than 500 million people right now on the planet, which means, 7.5 billion people got to go somewhere. And we all know about this, right? That was no accident, and it's exactly what it was meant to do. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do. And they're up with more. They'll come up with more things like that too. It's not a nice thing, but it is. That's just the way it is. I mean, I can't give you. You can read the data. All you can do is read the source documents, right? Make up your own mind. That's all I'm asking. Read those source documents. You can go listen to Catherine Austin Fitz about that story of this 8.5-foot guy telling you. And even there's even stranger things. Like I live in Arizona for a long time and have contacts with, let's say, the Native Americans, at least the Dene, right? And there's a story. These two. This is actually documented. People can find it. They want to. There's a couple. They heard there was a meeting of the Skinwalkers, right? There's if you're on the res, you kind of hear these things. And so these two not so smart 20-year-olds Navajo Denes thought they'd go do that, and they drove their pickup truck. Then they snuck around, and they were going to put on a high ridge above where all the Skinwalkers were going to be meeting, this thing. And they finally got up there, and they looked over, and there was like all the couple hundred Skinwalkers, right, doing their things. And in the middle of instructing them was like this really dark figure. It was a human figure, and it was like 8.5 feet tall. But it was a human figure. It wasn't a Sasquatch, right? Because their arms are longer. So it was literally a human figure, the tallest human. And the guy suddenly picked up and saw them, right? He like could telepathically tell they were there, and he kind of they booted out. It got bad for them. They had to leave the res and move to Phoenix because their lives were threatened by the Skinwalkers stuff. But here's this 8.5-foot tall human guy instructing the Skinwalkers into their dark arts. There's the blessing way and the witching way. And so what the hell is this? That's crazy. And you've probably seen reports of really tall people, like in Mexico and sometimes up in Canada. They have these reports of like these 15-foot tall people, right? You'll hear reports every now and then, and people discount it. Well, maybe you shouldn't discount it.
Now, when it comes to the Genie rocket, supposedly being to take down UFOs, is there any documented reports?
There's no document of taking down a UFO with it. They could have, but they made 3,000 of them, and there certainly wasn't 3,000 Russian bombers, not even close, not even 100. And then they distribute them, and they made a bunch of nukes, 1.5 to 3 kiloton nukes on the end of them, which you're looking at 1,500 to 1,000 foot just total death range. And later they were replaced by more advanced models. So when they decommissioned them, there was already new, more advanced models of surface-to-surface missiles. Because if you're dealing with alien spacecraft, what do you got, right? This is the 1950s. What do you got? If all you got is a hammer, well, all we had was nukes. So let's put them on a surface air-to-air missile, and maybe we get lucky. And it was close because the missile only went like 6 miles before it detonated. That means you have to take your jet and just turn it like a crazy mother and dive and just hope you stay alive from the blast wave that comes off of that. So it's a serious threat. And it puts out, those things will put out like a mass of neutrons, kill everything for like 1,000 feet, right? And sicken anything for a whole lot longer. The neutron flux that comes off of those things is just immense.
Do you believe that we have nuclear capabilities in space?
Well, there was that story when they tried to send. They were going to send a nuke. It was like in the dark of the moon, right? When the moon's dark, and we can't see it, but it's there. And they were going to send a nuke and nuke the moon with a big nuke, and to show America how powerful America was. And I think they even have pictures of this. But when they launched that rocket off, this like saucer or orb type craft appeared and like went around and zapped the missile from different directions, and then it started tumbling and crashed. And allegedly that's happened twice. They're not going to let whoever's out there isn't going to let us nuke the moon. And they must know that we were going to nuke the moon. They must be monitoring us, because how could they be there to shoot it down, right? So they're just not going to. I think there's certain levels, there are certain rules, because they find those ancient. You've probably seen the 2.9-year-old nickel iron spheres in South Africa that they mining. That's that ancient gold deposit. they've looked at the isotopic structure of those spheres. It's not from the planet. Those, whatever those nickel, they look nothing more than like big giant ball bearings, and maybe left over from some mining machines 2.9 billion years ago. Because that area in South Africa, I mean, it was as big as the Amazon. There was a mountains bigger than the Amazon, but there were no plants, right? 2.9 billion years ago, there was nothing, right? And so the erosion was massive. And then the plain that is the South African gold deposit at that time was like as a big, imagine the big Amazon basin, but without any trees and just vast flooding waters. And so there was like massive deposits of gold. And usually from the Amazon, we find the gold in patches, right? But in the deposit of South America, which at that time was flat, now it's a basin because it dipped, all we find is flour gold. It's the most incredibly rich flour gold find, but we don't find nuggets. We don't find stuff that we find in the Amazon. It's like something went there and just mined that whole area, stripped it of all the gold. And the only gold that was left was maybe just a layer of powderized gold on a flat surface. And then they just left the machines, and all that's left is the ball bearings. And then in 285 million years ago in Pennsylvania coal, you can actually go to a museum in England and see it. They were digging this coal out, and they found ceramic pipe, like a broken up ceramic pipe. And there was coal inside the pipe, right? I think Forbidden Archaeology has a lot of these stories in it, if people are looking for a book. And so obviously we've had like advanced species have come and visited the planet and left, trash basically that we can find today. And that's just a couple of many of these weird finds in history, but they're usually just one-offs, but they're alien trash. So if you had a spacefaring civilization that's 285 million years ago, they've so advanced now that it's just because the biggest things were 6-foot salamanders at the time, right? And so I think there seems to be a hierarchy of let's say power and structure in the galaxy, and all the stuff we're dealing with, these mass contact guys and the reptoids and all the mantoids, they're pretty much at our level, right? And there's much more advanced beings that come by. I can tell you more stories about that. I used to know. You remember Jose Escamilla? Did you ever meet him?
No, I do not.
Yeah, he was. I'm not sure who. Maybe was it Bruce Sports that gave it to him? But anyway, this guy had been filming the moon for I don't know. He had a 22-inch reflector, right? And he'd been doing it. And Jose was going to release a thing called Moon Rising. He eventually did put out a film called Moon Rising, but it was nothing like what I saw. And this guy had been filming objects flying between the Earth and the moon, and just had like dozens and dozens. And these objects are huge, like 60 kilometers across, 100 kilometers across. Just one after another after another. Like the weirdest one, he was filming the moon, and all of a sudden this glowing postage stamp appeared above the moon. It kind of had texture, like it was almost a city on its surface, but it was like something like 120 miles by 80 miles. It was that Fibonacci series like rectangle that your credit cards are. It was there for like a second and a half, and you could see the texture of it, and it was glowing brilliant like a golden light, and you could see the shadow of the object on the moon below. So you knew it was above the moon, Earth, and it was there for like a second and a half, and then it just blinked out and disappeared. See, what is that? That's just a being so advanced, it just stopped by for a second and a half. So I think Earth's on the tourist trail. So it's like a national park. So you can, there's poachers and there's different levels. So there's different hierarchies there. We don't understand it, but we did get banned from the moon in the Apollo 17, when you could listen in on Apollo through the some of the shortwave bands. You could actually hear them talking back and forth with Apollo. Anybody could do. And when Apollo 17 left the moon's gravity going to the Earth, 10,000 people listened on ham radios, heard very distinctly, "Do not return." And we never went back to the moon. So that's that. There's 10,000 guys heard that. It's documented.
But India can somehow land on the moon.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No, they sent, we've seen the stuff that we put on the moon, but there's a lot of other stuff. Yeah, the Moon Rising that Jose put out, it was actually, he got the old what was that? There's a survey that they did of the moon earlier and before Apollo. I'm trying to remember the name of the project. But anyway, what they did, it goes to a private corporation, right? And then that private corporation edits it, and then it goes to NASA. But starts with a C. But when they did the editing, you could just get Jose's Moon Rising. I think Gaia owns the copyrights. They just edit it out. Like there'll be like a dome. You can see like perfect moon, and then you'll see like a blurred dome or a blurred tower, or also all that. They didn't blend it, right? You know, today we blend stuff. They just like blanked it out with like a blur. And so Jose's book, Jose's video, Moon Rising, you just literally see like domes and spires and buildings and stuff that had been blocked out. But you can see the squares or the circles or the towers. It was like ridiculous. Clementine mission, the Clementine mission tapes. That's what it was. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Just a ridiculous edit job. But you know, you could go see Jose's films. They're on. I think they're on the guy. You know, they bought out Jose and they bought all his products, so they own them. And I think they sell it to you if you want to.
That's interesting. I do remember someone filming. It might have been that guy, like the crafts that are going in and out of.
Yeah, the Roswell rods that go really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main thing. But he did a bunch of other UFO things besides that. Yeah, and I was involved in that. I've seen some crazy stuff, and they did a show on it, a Fox video show. It was showing all around the world, except for the United States, because if they showed it in the United States, they'd have to pay Jose residuals, right? So they just used it all over the world. I'm even in it, and then they never showed it in the United States. But the parts they didn't put in, they have these same rod-like creatures flying around the space shuttle in orbit, like flying in and out of the bays and stuff. There's dozens and dozens of shots of these things, and they have, you know, they say they're bugs, right? But how can a bug fly in the shuttle bay in orbit, right? Kind of hard. You know, not much out there to flap in outer space, but these critters or whatever they are were doing that. Yeah, it's kind of goes into Trevor James Constable. He was a friend of mine. I knew Trevor. He taught me a lot about, you know, different things, etheric ray engineering and stuff. And so, yeah, but that was also kind of, he would take pictures. He'd use a 18A filter on regular cameras, and that blocks like all the regular light, but allows the ultraviolet and the infrared to come through. And he would set up his cloud busters and stuff. And he was like one of the original ones. And then he'd take pictures, and there'd be like these weird organisms. You couldn't see them in visible light, but you could see them in ultraviolet and infrared light. And he has a book, They Live in the Sky, and another, They Came from Outer Space. He also wrote a bunch of books about World War II fighting aces. And with one of my uncles, Colonel Tolliver. So you can go out there and find Trevor James Constable and Colonel Tolliver about these World War II fighter aces. They wrote books together, so it's like 2 steps removed. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I had the guy on the show that he calls them fireflies or whatever that he's filmed.
Yeah, that's the same stuff. Kind of pretty much the same stuff that Jose was seeing. And they filmed them back then, and they didn't have an explanation. And they're filming stuff like that today, and they still don't really have a good explanation on what they are.
Yeah,
I mean,
Robert Scheidt.
Yeah, some of it looks real. They've shown proportions and stuff that these things are moving at like hundreds or thousands of miles an hour, but they don't have an explanation for what they are. Yeah, I've seen some of this stuff. Yeah, it's the same stuff. It's just like the next generation discovers what the generation knew before that, and then Trevor was the generation even before that. So we're looking at 3 generations of seeing these things, and we still don't have an explanation.
Yeah, there was one really interesting one that he showed on the channel where this craft like busted through a cloud. It was the most convincing one that he had. Other ones, it could be something else other than what they said that it was, but this one literally punctured through a cloud in the sky, and it made this big burst out the side of the cloud.
Yeah, See, that's kind of hard to explain away, right?
A bug can't bust through a cloud.
Yes,
like
exactly.
That.
Exactly. So the explanation, the same way with Jose's pictures. Some of them probably were bugs, right? But some of them obviously weren't. Obviously, they weren't filming bugs in outer space. It seems a little out of their habitat. And like another thing, when they remember the old space station, the original one, and one of the things that they put this like aerogel on the outside of it. I think they've done it on the regular space station we have now, and they just let it sit there for years, right? And then they go outside and they take it in. And one of the most common things they found in it was diatoms from sea plankton. How the hell do diatoms are like little single cell algae things, but they have a silicate crust. They make a silicate, shell for themselves. So the silicate shell is very resistant to damage, right? And they find just whole bunches of them in the aerogel in the space shuttle in orbit. How the hell did diatoms get out of the ocean to well, some people say it's because spacecraft are coming in and out of the Earth, and as they fly away from Earth, there's water droplets fall off from the ocean, right? And inside them, there's diatoms, because there's diatoms everywhere in the ocean. It's it's like single cell algae, just they're everywhere. So how did diatoms get into the aerogel on the outside of the space station?
Yeah, that sounds like the Oakville blobs in 1994 in Washington, in Oakville, Washington. And their reasoning for that, they said that the blobs were exploded jellyfish that traveled hundreds of miles inland from a storm.
You remember the tether incident, where the space shuttle was pulling that tether through the Earth's magnetic field, and it just caused such an electric current that it snapped the cable, and then it went floating out there, wobbling back and forth, and all these weird round, like pulsing things came around them. It's called the tether incident. It happened on the space station when it broke. It's a real classic. And that they're translucent. They're like these translucent space plankton. That's what I call them. That's another bunch of crazy critters, man. They wouldn't, they're hundreds of feet across, but they probably wouldn't fit into a large glass jar. There's some sort of weird space plankton creatures. That's what they live in the sky. Trevor James Constable talks about. Or The Cosmic Pulse of Life is another one of his books. These are classics that people, I'm kind of getting up there into the classics, and this stuff was done in the 50s, right? So don't worry about today's stuff. That before they had, all this fake camera stuff, right, that you could do. Back then, when they didn't have that technology, they've got some really profound evidence, but it's 80 years ago, 70 years ago. I mean, go back. Charles Fort had a bunch of stuff on that stuff. I mean, so digging back into the history, Trevor James Constable, these guys, there's a bunch of really good stuff to learn from. Forbidden Archaeology, that's another book. I mean, for people, this is like the base, right? To get to a better understanding, these are some of the base sort of books you should read. And there's lots more, by the way. They're not the only ones, but that's just a few that I found that have been particularly useful. And I knew Trevor, so I guess I biased it that way.
Well, Ken, thanks so much for coming on and discussing that with me. I think, the audience just needs to make up their own mind, regardless if they believe in extraterrestrials or they don't believe in extraterrestrials. I think just common sense and critical thinking is just important here. Can you let people know where to find you, and let people know the names of those books, if they, again, in case
I'll just say them again. It's Stefano Recchia, and it is called 50 Years of Friendship, but the Italians say it Amicizia, and that's probably not correctly pronounced, so forgive my Italian. I didn't take Italian in school. And then the other, Stefano Recchia, wrote Mass Contacts. That's like the original one. The first third is the Umites is disinformation thing. And then some of the things, they put these guys on snipe tapes. They were just like running them all over the place. And, they spent 450 kilograms of platinum, right? They built a villa. That's 800 pounds of platinum. That's a lot of money. I don't know how much 800 pounds of platinum is in today's value, but it's a lot. So this was a major operation that these extraterrestrials, or whoever they were running. And it's really a good read, and one should it's like the source literature, right? I'm source literature. Trevor James Constable, Stefio Brancha, and Jose Escamilla, some of just the people that I know. There's dozens more, but it's a good source material for anybody who wants to learn about the UFO to have that. There's lots of others, but those are some important ones.
Where can people find you online if they would like to?
I am the C60 guy. So shopc60.com. C60 discovered in 85, got a Nobel Prize in 1996. When they took it for testing for toxicity, it increased the lifespan of test animals by 90%. Got rid of my macular degeneration. I'm 65, looking pretty good. So anyway, it won't make you live forever, but it's certainly it's a SOD catalase mimic, so it goes in your mitochondria and works as superoxide dismutase and catalase. And when your mitochondria are working, you got ATP, you got pregnenolone, the precursor for all your hormones, and it's one of its well-known side effects is causes a significant increase in libido in both men and women. And unexpected pregnancy. There's like lots of C60 babies. Women who thought they couldn't get pregnant are now pregnant. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But yeah, just when your mitochondria are functioning and inflammation goes down throughout your body through the use of carbon 60. And but we're shopc60.com. I could go on, but you know, that's not what really the show is. It's just something that I do to pay my budget to do Moxie Fusion and talk to you about crazy UFO stuff.
Thank you very much, Ken. Really appreciate it. The links to Ken's information will be in the description of this video. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button, help the channel and the algorithm, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.